Officer James Wilson woke up early that morning. The sun had not yet risen when his alarm went off. He got out of bed, made coffee, and put on his police uniform. Today was an important day. He would finally see that troublemaker teen in court. For 3 months, Officer Wilson had been trying to catch the person who kept painting graffiti in Central Park. The painted words were rude, and the pictures were ugly. The city spent thousands of dollars cleaning it up each time. Last Friday night, Officer Wilson finally caught someone. While on patrol, he saw a young man near the park fountain with paint on his hands. The teen, Marcus Johnson, claimed he was just walking through the park on his way home from a friend's house. But Officer Wilson didn't believe him. The paint on his hands was proof enough. "I've got you now," Officer Wilson had said while putting handcuffs on Marcus. The teen kept saying he didn't do anything wrong, but Officer Wilson had heard those words too many times before. The ride to the police station was quiet. Officer Wilson looked at Marcus through the rearview mirror. The boy was skinny with dark curly hair and brown eyes. He wore jeans and a blue t-shirt with a science joke on it. He didn't look like a bad kid, but Officer Wilson knew looks could be deceiving. At the station, Marcus called his mother. She arrived an hour later, upset and worried. She told Officer Wilson they had just moved to town a month ago, and Marcus was a good student who never got in trouble. "They all say that," Officer Wilson thought to himself. He had been on the force for 15 years and had seen hundreds of parents defend their guilty children. Marcus spent the weekend in the juvenile holding center. His mother couldn't pay the bail money. Officer Wilson felt a little bad about that, but rules were rules. If Marcus was innocent, the judge would let him go. But Officer Wilson was sure he had caught the right person. Now, as Officer Wilson drove to the courthouse, he felt confident. This would be an easy case. The evidence was clear. Marcus was in the park after dark. He had paint on his hands, and new graffiti was found nearby. It didn't matter that they didn't actually see him painting. It was enough to convince any judge. The courthouse was an old building made of gray stone. Officer Wilson parked his car and walked up the wide steps. Inside, people moved around quickly. Lawyers carried folders and papers. Families waited nervously on wooden benches. Officer Wilson checked the schedule on the wall. The case would be heard by Judge Reynolds in courtroom 3. He had never appeared before Judge Reynolds before. The judge was new to this courthouse, having moved from another city recently. This should be interesting, Officer Wilson thought. He straightened his tie and brushed some dust off his uniform sleeve. First impressions were important, especially with a new judge. As he walked down the hallway toward courtroom 3, Officer Wilson saw Marcus sitting on a bench with his mother. The boy looked tired and scared. For a moment, Officer Wilson wondered if he had made a mistake. But then he remembered his duty to keep the city clean and safe. If Marcus was innocent, he had nothing to worry about. Little did Officer Wilson know that this day would change his life forever. The case he thought would be simple was about to become the most complicated situation of his career. Courtroom 3 was bigger than Officer Wilson expected. Rows of wooden benches filled the room. A large desk sat at the front where the judge would sit. The walls were light brown with old pictures of past judges hanging on them. Officer Wilson took his place near the front. He watched as Marcus and his mother entered the room. They sat on the other side with a young lawyer the court had given them. The lawyer looked fresh out of school and very nervous. "All rise for Judge Howard Reynolds," the court officer announced. Everyone stood as a tall man with gray hair and glasses walked in. Judge Reynolds wore the black robe of his position and carried a folder of papers. His face was serious as he sat down and looked around the room. "Be seated," he said in a deep voice. Officer Wilson studied the judge carefully. There was something familiar about his face, but Wilson couldn't place it. Maybe he had seen him on the news. The court clerk read the case details. Marcus Johnson, age 17, charged with vandalism of public property in Central Park. Judge Reynolds looked at Marcus for a long time. His expression gave away nothing. "How does the defendant plead?" the judge asked. The young lawyer stood up. Not guilty, Your Honor. Officer Wilson almost rolled his eyes. Of course, the kid would say he was not guilty. They always did. Officer Wilson, the judge said, please tell the court what happened on the night of the arrest. Officer Wilson stood up straight and spoke clearly. Last Friday night at about 10:30 p.m., I was patrolling Central Park. We had reports of graffiti appearing on the park statues and walls. I found the defendant near the main fountain. He had fresh paint on his hands and clothes. When I questioned him, he gave unclear answers about why he was in the park after closing hours. Did you see him painting anything? Judge Reynolds asked. No, Your Honor, but the evidence was clear. He was the only person in that area, and new graffiti was found on the fountain base. The judge wrote something down. And what did the defendant say when you questioned him? He claimed he was just walking through the park on his way home. Officer Wilson spoke with confidence, but the park was out of his way according to the address he gave. Judge Reynolds turned to Marcus. Young man, would you like to tell your side of the story? Marcus stood up slowly. His hands were shaking. Yes, Your Honor. I was walking home from my friend's house. I know the park is closed after dark, but it saves me 20 minutes to cut through it. I saw someone painting the fountain, and I tried to stop them. You expect us to believe that? Officer Wilson interrupted. He couldn't help himself. Officer Wilson, the judge said sharply, you will wait your turn to speak. Marcus continued. When I tried to stop them, they ran away. I tried to wipe off the wet paint with my hands. That's why I had paint on me. Then Officer Wilson showed up and arrested me before I could explain. Officer Wilson felt his anger rising. This was clearly a made-up story. No teenager tries to clean up graffiti in a dark park at night. Your Honor, Officer Wilson said, we've heard this kind of story before. The facts are simple. Judge Reynolds raised his hand to stop Officer Wilson. I have some questions for both of you. His eyes moved from Marcus to Officer Wilson. And I think there's more to this case than meets the eye. Officer Wilson felt uneasy. Something about the way the judge looked at Marcus seemed odd. What was going on here? Judge Reynolds looked at the papers in front of him. Officer Wilson, the report says there were no witnesses to this incident. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. It was late at night, and the park was closed to the public, Officer Wilson answered. And no security cameras in that area of the park. No, Your Honor. The city has not yet installed cameras at the fountain. Judge Reynolds nodded slowly. I see. He turned to Marcus. Young man, you say you were trying to clean the graffiti when Officer Wilson found you. Yes, sir, Marcus said. His voice was a little stronger now. I saw two older boys spray painting bad words on the fountain. I told them to stop, and they ran away. I felt bad about the damage, so I tried to wipe it off while it was still wet. That's a nice story, Officer Wilson said, unable to hide his disbelief. But if there were two other boys, where did they go? And why didn't you tell me this when I arrested you? I did tell you, Marcus said. You didn't listen. You just put handcuffs on me right away. Officer Wilson felt his face getting hot. That's not true. I asked you what you were doing in the park. Judge Reynolds tapped his desk with his pen. Officer, please control yourself. We will hear both sides fairly. The judge turned to Marcus's mother. Mrs. Johnson, can you tell us about your son's character? Has he been in trouble before? Marcus's mother stood up. She wore a simple blue dress and looked tired. No, Your Honor. Marcus has never been in trouble. He gets good grades in school and wants to study law someday. We moved here last month when I got a new job at the hospital. Marcus doesn't know many people here yet, so he spends most of his time studying. Officer Wilson tried not to roll his eyes. Every parent said their child was perfect. And where is Mr. Johnson? The judge asked. We're divorced, Your Honor. He lives in another state. Judge Reynolds looked at Marcus again. Something in his expression changed, but Officer Wilson couldn't tell what it meant. I have one more question for Marcus, the judge said. Why were you cutting through the park that night? Where exactly were you coming from? Marcus looked down at his shoes. I was at my new friend David's house. We were studying for a science test. His house is on Maple Street, on the other side of the park from where we live. And what time did you leave David's house? Around 10:15, sir. His mom can confirm that. Judge Reynolds wrote something down. Officer Wilson, did you check the boy's story? Did you call this friend's family? Officer Wilson shifted uncomfortably. No, Your Honor. The evidence seemed clear enough. The judge frowned. Evidence is never clear enough when a young person's future is at stake. You should have done a more thorough investigation. Officer Wilson felt embarrassed and angry at the same time. Why was the judge taking the boy's side? This was supposed to be a simple case. Your Honor, Officer Wilson said firmly, the facts show that Marcus Johnson was in the park after hours with paint on his hands. The new graffiti was right there. What more investigation was needed? Judge Reynolds stared at Officer Wilson for a long moment. The kind of investigation that ensures we don't punish innocent people, officer. The kind that upholds justice rather than just making arrests. Officer Wilson felt his temper rising. He had been a police officer for 15 years. He knew how to do his job. This new judge had no right to question his methods. Your Honor, Officer Wilson said, with all due respect, I followed standard procedure. The evidence pointed to the boy's guilt. Evidence can be misleading without context. Judge Reynolds replied calmly. Let's hear from the prosecution. Do you have anything to add? A young woman in a gray suit stood up. Your Honor, the prosecution believes Officer Wilson acted properly based on the circumstances. The defendant was in a closed park after hours with paint on his hands that matched the new graffiti. We don't need to prove he was seen in the act of painting. Judge Reynolds nodded. And the defense? Marcus's lawyer stood up, looking nervous. Your Honor, my client has no previous record. He is a good student who just moved to town. He has a reasonable explanation for why he was in the park and why he had paint on his hands. Without direct evidence that he created the graffiti, we ask that the charges be dismissed. The courtroom was quiet. Everyone waited for the judge to speak. Officer Wilson watched Judge Reynolds' face carefully. Something wasn't right here. The judge kept looking at Marcus in a strange way. Before I make my decision, Judge Reynolds said, I want to see the photos of the graffiti. Officer Wilson, do you have them? Yes, Your Honor. Officer Wilson handed a folder to the court officer, who gave it to the judge. Judge Reynolds opened the folder and studied the pictures. His expression changed as he looked at the images. The graffiti says, Reynolds is a loser, the judge read aloud. Interesting. Officer Wilson felt confused. Why was that interesting? Marcus, the judge said, did you notice what the graffiti said when you tried to clean it? Yes, sir, Marcus answered. That's partly why I tried to clean it. I thought it might be about you. Since you're Judge Reynolds, I saw your name in the newspaper when you moved here last month. A murmur went through the courtroom. Officer Wilson looked back and forth between Marcus and the judge. There was something he was missing. Officer Wilson, Judge Reynolds said, did you consider that the graffiti might be directed at someone specific? No, Your Honor. Graffiti often contains random names and insults. Judge Reynolds closed the folder. I think it's time to clear up a few things. This case is more complicated than it appears. He turned to Marcus's mother. Mrs. Johnson, your divorce was finalized how long ago? She looked surprised at the question. 10 years ago, Your Honor. And before your marriage, what was your last name? Reynolds, Your Honor. I went back to my maiden name after the divorce. Officer Wilson felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Reynolds. The judge's name was Reynolds. Marcus's mother's maiden name was Reynolds. Judge Reynolds looked around the courtroom. In the interest of transparency, I need to disclose something important. Marcus Johnson is my son. The courtroom erupted in surprised whispers. Officer Wilson stood frozen, unable to believe what he was hearing. I didn't know Marcus would appear in my courtroom today, Judge Reynolds continued. When his mother and I divorced, she moved away with Marcus. I only recently learned they had moved back to this city. The courtroom went completely silent. Officer Wilson stood in shock, his mouth slightly open. Everything made sense now. The way Judge Reynolds had looked at Marcus. The similar features Wilson hadn't quite noticed before. Due to this obvious conflict of interest, Judge Reynolds said, "I will recuse myself from this case immediately. Another judge will be assigned." But before anyone could move, Officer Wilson's anger boiled over. The embarrassment of being questioned by the judge, combined with the feeling that he had been tricked, was too much. "This is ridiculous," Officer Wilson shouted. "You knew all along. This was a setup." Judge Reynolds looked at him calmly. "Officer Wilson, control yourself. This was not a setup. Court records are assigned randomly. Neither Marcus nor I knew we would face each other today." But Officer Wilson wasn't listening. 15 years of dealing with criminals who lied to his face had made him suspicious of everyone. He was convinced this was some kind of trick to embarrass him. "The boy is guilty," Officer Wilson yelled, pointing at Marcus. "He's just getting special treatment because of who his father is." People in the courtroom gasped. The court officer moved toward Officer Wilson, but he was too slow. In a moment of blind rage, Officer Wilson lunged across the room. He grabbed Marcus by the shirt collar and yanked him up from his chair. "Tell the truth," he shouted, shaking the frightened teen. "Stop lying." Marcus didn't fight back. His eyes were wide with fear as Officer Wilson shook him. Several people in the courtroom pulled out their phones and started recording. "Officer Wilson," Judge Reynolds' voice thundered through the courtroom. "Release my son this instant." The bailiff finally reached them and pulled Officer Wilson away from Marcus. The teen fell back into his chair, shaking. "That's my son," Judge Reynolds said again, his voice deadly quiet now. "And you just assaulted him in my courtroom." Officer Wilson froze. The reality of what he had just done hit him like cold water. He had attacked a teenager in front of dozens of witnesses, including a judge. His career was over. "Your Honor, Officer Wilson began, but Judge Reynolds cut him off. "Take Officer Wilson into custody," the judge ordered the bailiff. "Charge him with assault on a minor." The bailiff looked uncomfortable but reached for his handcuffs. Officer Wilson didn't resist as the cold metal closed around his wrists. This couldn't be happening. Just this morning, he had been a respected police officer about to win an easy case. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, standing up. "Perhaps we could handle this differently. Officer Wilson has a clean record up to now." Judge Reynolds seemed to consider this. The courtroom waited in tense silence. "Take Officer Wilson to the holding room," the judge finally said. "I will decide how to proceed after I have spoken with my son." As the bailiff led Officer Wilson out, he glanced back. Judge Reynolds had left the bench and was kneeling in front of Marcus, checking if he was hurt. The mother stood nearby, her face a mix of worry and relief. In the holding room, Officer Wilson sat with his head in his hands. What had he done? He had let his temper ruin everything. Even if Marcus was guilty of the graffiti, that didn't justify what just happened. 20 minutes later, the door to the holding room opened. Judge Reynolds walked in, still wearing his black robe. His face was serious but calm. Officer Wilson stood up quickly. "Your Honor, I want to apologize. I lost control. There's no excuse for my behavior." Judge Reynolds motioned for him to sit down. The judge took a seat across from him. "Officer Wilson, I've been a judge for 20 years, he said. "In that time, I've seen good people make terrible mistakes. What you did today was wrong. You know that." "Yes, sir," Officer Wilson said. He couldn't look the judge in the eyes. "Marcus is fine," Judge Reynolds continued. "Scared, but not hurt." Officer Wilson felt a small bit of relief. At least he hadn't physically harmed the boy. "I could press charges against you," the judge said. "You would lose your job. You might even go to jail. Is that what you want?" No, sir, Officer Wilson whispered. What do you want, Officer Wilson? Why did you become a police officer? The question surprised him. He hadn't thought about that in years. I wanted to help people, he said finally. To make the community better, safer. Judge Reynolds nodded. And does arresting teenagers without proper investigation help the community? Officer Wilson had no answer. Let me tell you something about my son, Judge Reynolds said. Marcus has always stood up for what's right, even when it's difficult. When he was 10, he got a black eye defending a smaller child from bullies. If he says he was trying to clean that graffiti, I believe him. Officer Wilson remained silent. But I know that as his father, my opinion is biased. The judge continued. That's why I should never have been assigned to this case. And it's why I'm going to make you an offer. Officer Wilson looked up. The security footage from the park entrance was just delivered to the court. Judge Reynolds said, It doesn't show the fountain, but it shows who entered and left the park that night. Would you like to see it before I decide what to do about your assault on my son? Officer Wilson nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Reynolds went to the door and spoke to someone outside. A moment later, a court officer brought in a laptop. He set it up and left. Judge Reynolds pressed play on a video file. The black and white footage showed the park entrance. A timestamp in the corner read 9:45 p.m. Watch carefully, the judge said. On screen, 2 teenage boys entered the park. They were carrying backpacks and looking around nervously. The timestamp moved forward. At 10:05, the same 2 boys ran out of the park, laughing. One of them was carrying what looked like a spray paint can. At 10:12, Marcus entered the park alone. He walked quickly, clearly taking the shortcut. At 10:28, Officer Wilson's police car pulled up to the entrance. The video ended there. Officer Wilson stared at the screen. The evidence had been there all along. If he had just checked the security footage before arresting Marcus, none of this would have happened. I made a mistake, Officer Wilson said quietly. A terrible mistake. Judge Reynolds closed the laptop. Yes, you did. Several mistakes, actually. You jumped to conclusions. You didn't do a thorough investigation. You lost your temper in my courtroom. And you assaulted a young man who was telling the truth. Officer Wilson nodded, feeling sick to his stomach. Do you know why I became a judge, Officer Wilson? Judge Reynolds asked. No, sir. Because I believe in justice. Real justice, not just following rules. Justice means taking the time to find the truth. It means being fair even when it's difficult. Officer Wilson listened, still unable to look the judge in the eyes. I've seen your record, Judge Reynolds continued. 15 years on the force. Many arrests. Many convictions. Yes, sir. But looking at your record more carefully, I noticed something. In the last few years, most of your arrests have been young people, mostly for small crimes. And most of those cases were resolved with guilty pleas, not trials. Officer Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. When was the last time one of your arrests went to trial, and you had to defend your evidence? The judge asked. Officer Wilson thought about it. Maybe 3 years ago. Most perps take a plea deal. So you arrest them, and they plead guilty to avoid the risk of a longer sentence. But what if some of them were innocent, like Marcus? What if they just didn't think anyone would believe them over a police officer? The question hung in the air. Officer Wilson had never thought about it that way. Here's what's going to happen, Judge Reynolds said after a long silence. First, all charges against Marcus are being dropped. The security footage clearly shows he didn't commit the crime. I understand, Officer Wilson said. Second, I'm not going to press charges against you for assaulting my son. Officer Wilson looked up in surprise. But there will be consequences, the judge continued. I'm reporting this incident to your superior officer. You will be suspended without pay for 1 month. During that time, you will attend anger management classes and complete 40 hours of community service working with teens at the youth center. Yes, sir, Officer Wilson said. It was better than he deserved. And when you return to duty, you will be assigned a body camera that must be on during all interactions with the public. Your arrest procedures will be reviewed monthly for 6 months. I understand, Your Honor. Judge Reynolds stood up. My son asked me not to be too hard on you. He said everyone makes mistakes. Officer Wilson felt even worse hearing that. The boy he had wrongly arrested and then assaulted was defending him. Marcus is a good kid, Judge Reynolds said. He wants to study law someday. Maybe this experience will teach him that our justice system isn't perfect, but it can still work if good people try to do the right thing. As Judge Reynolds turned to leave, Officer Wilson found his voice again. Your Honor, how did you know? About Marcus being your son, I mean. Before Mrs. Johnson said her maiden name was Reynolds. Judge Reynolds paused at the door. I didn't know until I saw him. He has his mother's last name now, and I hadn't seen him in person for 2 years. He lives with his mother most of the time. But when I saw him sitting there, I knew. He looks just like I did at his age. Officer Wilson returned to the courtroom with Judge Reynolds. Everyone was still there, waiting to see what would happen. Marcus sat with his mother, looking nervous. The room went quiet when they entered. Judge Reynolds returned to his place behind the bench. Officer Wilson stood in front of him, no longer in handcuffs but still feeling like a prisoner. I have made my decision, Judge Reynolds announced to the courtroom. The case against Marcus Johnson is dismissed. The evidence clearly shows he did not commit the crime. The courtroom remained silent, waiting for more. As for Officer Wilson's actions today, the judge continued, I have decided not to press charges for the assault on my son. Instead, Officer Wilson will face departmental discipline, including suspension without pay, mandatory anger management training, and community service. Marcus's mother looked surprised. Some people in the audience whispered to each other. I want to apologize to Marcus Johnson publicly, Judge Reynolds said. You should never have been arrested, and you certainly should never have been treated the way you were today in this courtroom. Marcus nodded, his eyes lowered. Court is adjourned, Judge Reynolds said, hitting his gavel on the desk. As people began to leave, Officer Wilson walked over to Marcus and his mother. The boy tensed up as he approached. Marcus, Mrs. Johnson, Officer Wilson said quietly, I want to apologize for my actions, both for arresting you without proper evidence and for losing my temper today. There's no excuse for what I did. Marcus looked up at him. It's okay, Officer Wilson. I understand. Officer Wilson shook his head. No, it's not okay. But I promise I'll learn from this mistake. Mrs. Johnson looked at Officer Wilson with tired eyes. My son is a good boy. He has always tried to do the right thing, even when it's hard. I believe that now, Officer Wilson said, and I'm truly sorry. As he turned to leave, the prosecutor approached him. That could have gone much worse for you, she said. Officer Wilson nodded. I know. The judge was more fair than I deserved. He's known for being fair, the prosecutor said. That's why he was brought to this courthouse. Too many cops and judges here had forgotten what justice really means. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Someone had leaked news of what happened in the courtroom. Officer Wilson slipped out a side door, avoiding the cameras and questions. On the drive home, he thought about everything Judge Reynolds had said. Had he been too quick to arrest people, especially young people? Had he stopped looking for the truth and started just looking for someone to blame? He thought about his own son, now grown and living in another state. What if someone had treated him the way Officer Wilson had treated Marcus? When he got home, he called his police captain and explained what had happened. The captain was angry, as expected, but agreed to follow Judge Reynolds' recommended punishment. 1 month suspension without pay, anger management classes, community service at the youth center. 6 months later, Officer Wilson stood outside the youth center. His suspension had ended 5 months ago. The anger management classes were finished. His community service hours were complete, but he still came to the youth center every Tuesday and Thursday after his shift. Inside, a group of teenagers sat in a circle. They were part of a program called Teens and Police, started by Officer Wilson. The program brought teenagers and police officers together to talk about their experiences and build understanding. Officer Wilson, one of the boys, called out when he walked in. "We were just talking about the graffiti problem at the skate park. What do you think we should do about it?" Officer Wilson asked, taking a seat in the circle. "Maybe the city could give us a wall where we're allowed to paint," a girl suggested, "like a legal graffiti wall. Then people could express themselves without breaking the law." "That's a good idea," Officer Wilson said. "Why don't we write a proposal for the city council?" As the teens discussed their plan, Officer Wilson saw a familiar face at the door. Marcus Johnson stood there with his father, Judge Reynolds. "Come in," Officer Wilson said, standing up. "Everyone, these are special guests. Judge Reynolds and his son Marcus." The teens greeted them politely. Most of them knew the story of what had happened in the courtroom 6 months ago. It had been in all the local news. "Marcus is thinking about joining our program," Officer Wilson explained. "He wants to learn more about how the justice system works." After the meeting, Officer Wilson talked with Judge Reynolds while Marcus chatted with some of the teens. "How are you doing?" the judge asked. "Better," Officer Wilson said. "These kids have taught me a lot. I look at things differently now. I ask more questions. I listen more." Judge Reynolds nodded. "I've heard good things about your program. The police chief says your arrest numbers are down, but your solve rate is up." "That's right," Officer Wilson said. "I make fewer arrests, but they're the right arrests. Quality over quantity." "And the body camera?" Officer Wilson tapped the small device on his chest. "I don't even notice it anymore. And it's good protection for both me and the people I interact with." Marcus walked over to join them. He had grown taller in the last 6 months. "Dad says you're being considered for a community outreach position," Marcus said. Officer Wilson smiled. "That's right. If I get it, I'll be working with teenagers full-time, helping build better relationships between young people and police." "I think you'll be good at it," Marcus said. As they left, Officer Wilson thought about how much had changed because of that day in court. One moment of anger had nearly cost him everything. But it had also started him on a new path. He still made mistakes sometimes. He still had moments of frustration. But now he knew how to stop, think, and look for the truth instead of jumping to conclusions. The next day, Officer Wilson got a letter from the police department. He had been selected for the community outreach position. His first assignment would be expanding the Teens and Police program to other youth centers in the city. That evening, he drove to the park where it all began. The fountain was clean now, no sign of the graffiti that had started everything. A security camera had been installed nearby, one of many improvements made after the incident. Officer Wilson sat on a bench and watched as people enjoyed the park. Families with children, teenagers playing basketball, older people walking their dogs. This was why he had become a police officer, to protect places like this and the people who use them. He had lost sight of that somewhere along the way. But thanks to a judge and his son, he had found it again.